In the vast expanses of the Arizona Territory, 1885, a young woman named Eleanor Hayes stepped off a dusty stagecoach, clutching nothing but a small valise and a letter from a man she'd never met. The scorching desert sun beat down as she squinted at the small frontier town before her, Copper Creek. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor had come as a mail-order bride, desperate to escape the suffocating confines of Boston society after her family's financial ruin. But what awaited her was far from the secure marriage she'd hoped for. Within months, she would find herself caught between two worlds, that of her new husband's struggling cattle ranch and a nearby Apache village facing annihilation at the hands of corrupt officials and land-hungry settlers. This is the remarkable true story of how one woman's courage, compassion, and determination not only transformed her own life, but saved an entire community from destruction. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, sending dust swirling through the open windows. Eleanor Hayes coughed delicately into her handkerchief, smoothing down her traveling dress, once fine but now showing signs of wear after the 2-week journey from Boston. "Copper Creek! End of the line!" bellowed the driver. Eleanor gathered her small valise, all that remained of her former life, and stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt of the main street. The April heat hit her like a physical force after the relative cool of the coach. At 23, she had never ventured west of Philadelphia, and the raw, unfinished nature of the frontier town momentarily overwhelmed her. Men in dusty clothes lounged outside the saloon, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. A group of children chased a dog down the street, shouting with wild abandon. The buildings, a general store, a small church, the saloon, and a few other establishments appeared hastily constructed, as if the town itself wasn't certain it would remain. Eleanor pulled the crumpled letter from her reticule, checking the name again, James Blackwood. According to their correspondence, he would meet her at Tucker's General Store. She spotted the weathered sign and made her way toward it, conscious of the states following her progress. Inside the store, an elderly man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Mr. James Blackwood. I believe he's expecting me." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose slightly. "You must be the Eastern bride. James mentioned you'd be arriving today." He gestured toward a chair. "You can wait here if you like. He usually comes in for supplies around noon." Eleanor sank gratefully onto the chair, arranging her skirts. The journey had been exhausting, sleeping upright in crowded coaches, eating at way stations where the food was barely recognizable. But it had been her only option after her father's shipping business collapsed, leaving nothing but debts and shame. The advertisements for marriage opportunities in the Western Territories had seemed like providence. James Blackwood's letter had stood out from the others, honest about the hardships of ranch life, but also describing the beauty of the mountains and his hopes for building something worthwhile. He was 32, a former cavalry officer who had taken up cattle ranching after the war and in need of a wife to share his life. Eleanor had responded, sending a daguerreotype and her own letter detailing her education, her skills at household management, and her willingness to adapt to frontier life. What she hadn't mentioned was her desperation, the alternatives being a loveless marriage to one of her father's creditors or a life of genteel poverty as a companion to her bitter aunt. "Sir." Shop door swung open an hour later, and Eleanor looked up, her heart quickening. A tall man with broad shoulders filled the doorway, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He removed it as he entered, revealing sun-weathered features and questioning blue eyes. "Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor rose, extending her hand formally. "Miss Hayes." He took her hand briefly, his palm calloused against her skin. He studied her face intently, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "You made it safely, then. The journey wasn't too difficult." "Nothing I couldn't manage," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good, that's good to hear." He turned to the shopkeeper. "Tucker, I'll need the usual supplies, and," he hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, "perhaps some of that coffee you keep for special occasions." The journey to the Blackwood Ranch took another 2 hours by wagon. Eleanor tried not to flinch at each jolt over the rough trail. James spoke little, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming distant mountains. The landscape was unlike anything Eleanor had ever seen. Vast, arid, punctuated by towering red rock formations and scraggly juniper trees. "It's beautiful," she said at one point, genuinely moved by the wild grandeur. "So different from Massachusetts." James glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most Eastern women find it harsh, unforgiving." "It is that," Eleanor agreed, "but honest in its harshness. There's something admirable in that." The ranch house came into view as they created a rise, a substantial log structure with a stone chimney surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. A few cattle grazed in a nearby field, irrigated by a small creek. "It isn't much," James said, pulling the wagon to a halt. "Not compared to Boston." "It's more than I expected," Eleanor replied truthfully. The interior of the house was spare but clean, with simple furniture and a few unexpected touches. Bookshelves filled with volumes, a decent piano in one corner, faded curtains at the windows. "Sister stayed with me for a time," James explained, seeing her look at the piano. "Before she married and moved to California, she tried to make it more habitable." Eleanor set her valise down. "Where would you like me to put my things?" James cleared his throat. "I've prepared a room for you until we're married properly. Pastor Williams comes through every few weeks. He'll be here this Sunday." Eleanor felt her face flush. "That's considerate of you." "I'm not—" James paused, searching for words. "I know this isn't conventional. You don't know me, and I don't know you except through letters. I thought we might take some time before the wedding." Relief washed through her. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Blackwood." "James," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should call me James." The next few days established a tentative routine. Eleanor rose early, preparing breakfast before James went out to work the ranch. With his 2 hired hands, brothers named Miguel and Tomas Gonzalez. She spent her days cleaning, taking inventory of supplies, and exploring the immediate surroundings of the ranch house. James was unfailingly polite but reserved. He answered her questions directly, but offered little of himself voluntarily. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together, sometimes discussing books they had read or exchanging stories of their vastly different upbringings. Eleanor learned that James had fought for the Union during the Civil War, rising to the rank of captain. After the war, he had continued with the cavalry, stationed at various forts throughout the Western Territories. The land for his ranch had been purchased with his military savings 5 years earlier. "Why ranching?" she asked one evening. After a military career, James considered the question, turning his coffee cup in his large hands. "I'd seen enough of fighting, wanted to build something instead of—" He trailed off. "The land spoke to me. Challenging, but worthwhile." On the 3rd day, Eleanor ventured further from the house, following the creek that provided water for the ranch. The sound of splashing drew her attention, and she rounded a bend to discover a young Native American woman washing clothing in the stream. The woman looked up, startled. She appeared to be close to Eleanor's age, with a child of perhaps 3 years playing nearby on the bank. "Hello," Eleanor said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm Eleanor Hayes. I'm staying at the Blackwood Ranch." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I am Nahimana. This is my son Takoda." Her English was accented but clear. "It's nice to meet you," Eleanor said, uncertain of the protocol. "Do you live nearby?" "Our village is there." Nahimana pointed to the east, where the land rose toward distant hills. Beyond the ridge, the little boy, Takoda, had stopped playing and was watching Eleanor with solemn eyes. Eleanor smiled at him, and after a moment he smiled back shyly. "Are you James Blackwood's woman now?" Nahimana asked directly. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "We are to be married on Sunday." Nahimana nodded, returning to her washing. "He is a good man, fair to our people, not like some." Eleanor hesitated, then sat on a nearby rock. "Have you known him for a long time?" "3 winters. My husband Kitchi helps with the cattle sometimes. James pays fair wages." Nahimana wrung out a shirt with practiced hands. "You are from the east." "Boston," Eleanor confirmed. "It's very different from here. Why did you come? For James?" There was no judgment in Nahimana's tone, only curiosity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor considered deflecting the question, but found herself answering honestly. "Partly, but also because I had few options remaining there. My father lost everything in a business failure." Nahimana nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes the path chooses us." They talked as Nahimana finished her washing. Eleanor learned that the Apache village consisted of about 40 people, many related by blood or marriage. They lived on land that had been theirs for generations, though no official treaty protected their claim. As Nahimana gathered her wet laundry, she paused. "You should come to the village sometime. Meet the others." "I'd like that," Eleanor said, surprised by the invitation. "If it wouldn't be an intrusion. Come tomorrow, follow the creek past the big red boulder. You will see the path." Nahimana hoisted her washing basket, called to Takoda in their native language, and with a final nod to Eleanor, departed. When Eleanor mentioned the encounter to James that evening, his expression grew troubled. "The Apache village has been there longer than any white settlement in the area," he said. "They keep to themselves mostly, but we've built a decent relationship. They've helped me more than once when the creek flooded or when mountain lions were troubling the herd." "Nahimana invited me to visit tomorrow," Eleanor said. "I'd like to go, if you have no objection." James studied her for a moment. "No objection, but there's something you should know." He set down his fork. "There's been trouble brewing. A man named Victor Holloway has been buying up land all through the territory. He's got plans for a major cattle operation and wants the water rights to the creek that runs through both my property and the Apache land." "Can he do that?" Eleanor asked. "Legally? It's complicated. My water rights are documented with my land purchase. The Apache claim is ancestral but not recognized by the territorial government." James's jaw tightened. "Holloway has connections in Santa Fe, and he's not particular about his methods." "What do you mean?" "Pressure, threats. Some ranchers have reported cattle killed or fences cut until they agreed to sell." James shook his head. "I've made it clear. I'm not interested, and so far he's kept his distance. But the Apache village is more vulnerable." Eleanor frowned. "Surely there are laws that protect Indians." James gave a bitter laugh. "Miss Hayes, Eleanor, you're not in Boston anymore. Out here, law is often whatever the man with the most money or the most guns says it is." The following morning, Eleanor followed Nahimana's directions, tracing the creek beyond the ranch boundaries until she spotted the red boulder and the narrow path leading toward the hills. The April sun was warm, but a light breeze made the walk pleasant. The Apache village came into view as she rounded a bend in the path. A collection of traditional wickiups and a few more permanent structures nestled in a protected valley. Children played near the center of the settlement, while women worked at various tasks. Several men were tanning hides or crafting weapons at the perimeter. Activity paused as Eleanor approached, all eyes turning toward her. She faltered, suddenly aware of her intrusion, But then Nahimana emerged from one of the structures and waved. "You came," she said, approaching Eleanor. "Good. Come meet our elder, Hanska. He speaks good English and has been curious about James's new woman." Hanska proved to be a dignified man in his 70s, his face deeply lined but his eyes sharp. And assessing, he greeted Eleanor from where he sat outside his dwelling, gesturing for her to join him. "So you are to be the wife of James Blackwood," he said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "He is respected among our people. Honest, not afraid to stand his ground." "I'm learning that about him," Eleanor replied. "And what of you?" Hanska studied her intently. What kind of woman agrees to marry a man she has never met, in a place she has never seen? The directness of the question might have offended Eleanor in Boston, but here it seemed appropriate. "A woman with few alternatives," she answered truthfully, "but also one who wasn't afraid of hard work or a new beginning." Hanska's weathered face creased in a smile. "A good answer." He gestured around the village. "We know about new beginnings and endings." Throughout the day, Eleanor was introduced to various members of the community. Some were reserved, others openly curious about her. Children eventually overcame their shyness, touching her dress and asking questions about the East. Eleanor found herself enjoying their company, the straightforward interactions a refreshing change from the veiled conversations of Boston society. She observed the women preparing food, weaving baskets, and tending to children with practiced efficiency. Despite the language barrier with some, she managed to communicate through gestures and the translation help of those who spoke English. As the afternoon waned, Nahimana brought Eleanor to a small clearing where several women were preparing herbs and plants for medicinal use. An older woman named Kimimela, who Eleanor learned was the tribe's healer, showed her various preparations with evident pride. "These heal wounds," Kimimela explained, displaying a paste made from crushed leaves. "These for fever," she pointed, to another mixture drying in the sun. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, recognizing some plants from her limited knowledge of herbal remedies, but finding many others unfamiliar. Their lesson was interrupted by shouting from the edge of the village. A young Apache man raced into the clearing, calling out in his native language. The women around Eleanor grew tense, exchanging worried glances. "What's happening?" Eleanor asked Nahimana. "Riders coming," Nahimana replied, her expression grim. "White men, not friends." The village quickly organized itself. Children were ushered into dwellings, while men took up defensive positions at the perimeter. Eleanor found herself guided firmly but gently toward Hanska's wickiup. "You should not be seen," Nahimana explained. "It could make things worse." From the partial shelter of the dwelling, Eleanor watched as 6 riders approached the village. Even at a distance, their attitude was evident in their posture and the casual way they kept their hands near their weapons. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a florid face beneath his hat, reined in his horse at the edge of the settlement. Hanska walked forward to meet them, his bearing proud despite his age. 2 younger men flanked him, their faces impassive. "Holloway," Eleanor heard Hanska say, "you bring many men to speak words we have already heard." The man called Holloway dismounted, towering over the elderly Apache. "I bring more than words this time, old man. I will bring papers." He withdrew a document from his coat. "Signed by the territorial judge. This land has been officially classified as available for settlement. Your people have no legal claim here." A murmur ran through the gathered Apaches. Hanska remained steady. "We were here before your papers, before your judges. The land knows us as we know it." Holloway's laugh was harsh. "Save the Indian philosophy. You have 2 weeks to clear out. After that, my men will consider anyone remaining to be trespassing, and we deal with trespassers our own way." He swept his gaze across the village, his eyes suddenly locking with Eleanor's, where she stood partially concealed. His expression shifted to surprise, then calculation. "Well, what do we have here? A white woman among the savages?" He strode toward her, ignoring Hanska's protest. Eleanor stepped fully into view, drawing herself up to her full height. "I'm a visitor, sir, a guest of these people." Holloway looked her up and down, taking in her simple but clearly Eastern dress. "And who might you be, ma'am?" "Eleanor Hayes, soon to be Eleanor Blackwood." She emphasized the name, watching recognition flicker in his eyes. "Blackwood's mail-order bride," Holloway said, his tone mocking. "I heard he'd been sent away for one. Didn't expect to find you keeping company with Indians." "I find their company preferable to some I've encountered since arriving in the territory," Eleanor replied evenly. A dangerous smile spread across Holloway's face. "Spirited, I like that." He glanced back at Hanska. 2 weeks old man, and you might want to explain to your new friend here that choosing sides unwisely can have consequences." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy to Eleanor. "Ma'am?" As Holloway and his men rode away, the tension in the village remained palpable. Eleanor turned to Hanska, who was watching the departing riders with ancient, weary eyes. "Is what he said true? About the judge's order?" "The paper may be real," Hanska acknowledged, "but there is no justice in it. What will you do?" The old man sighed. "We have moved many times, each time to worse land, with less water, less game. There are few places left where my people can live as they have always lived." Eleanor felt a surge of indignation. "There must be something that can be done. Some way to fight this." Nahimana, who had come to stand beside them, gave Eleanor a measured look. "You care about this? Why? You hardly know us." Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Because it's wrong, and because—" She paused, sorting through her feelings. "Because you welcomed me when you had no reason to. Because this place, this land, should belong to those who understand and respect it." Hanska nodded slowly. "Words easily spoken, action is harder." "Then I'll help you take action," Eleanor said, the determination in her voice surprising even herself. "But first I need to speak with James. He knows this territory, the laws, the people. There must be a way to challenge Holloway's claim." As Eleanor prepared to leave, Nahimana walked with her to the edge of the village. "James is a good man," she said, "but one man alone cannot stand against Holloway and those who support him." "Then we'll find others," Eleanor replied. "I may be new to this territory, but I'm not unfamiliar with fighting against those who abuse power." She thought of her father's business, destroyed by the manipulations of wealthier competitors who had changed rules and called in favors to eliminate competition. The sun was beginning to set as Eleanor made her way back to the ranch, her mind racing with what she had witnessed and the injustice threatening the Apache village. The peaceful day of cultural exchange had transformed into something entirely different, a challenge that stirred something deep within her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before her father's downfall. James was waiting on the porch. When she returned, his face tight with concern. "I was about to come looking for you," he said, rising from his chair. "Miguel saw Holloway and his men headed toward the Apache village." "I was there," Eleanor confirmed, climbing the steps to stand before him. "He has a document from a territorial judge declaring the land open for settlement. He's given them 2 weeks to leave." James's expression darkened. "Damn it, I heard he was pushing for this, but I didn't think he'd get a ruling so quickly." He studied her face. "Are you all right? Holloway can be intimidating." "I'm fine," Eleanor said, "but the Apache village won't be if nothing is done." She met his gaze directly. "I want to help them, James. I need to help them. But I don't know how. Not yet." Something shifted in James's eyes. Surprise, certainly, but also a flicker of respect. It's not your fight, Eleanor. I'm making it my fight, she replied firmly. If I'm to be your wife, if this land is to be my home, then I can't stand by, while people who have welcomed me are driven from theirs. For a long moment James was silent, searching her face. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his features. You're not what I expected, Eleanor Hayes. Is that a problem? She asked. He shook his head slowly. No, not a problem at all. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. If we're going to take on Victor Holloway and his political connections, we've got some planning to do. As they entered the ranch house, Eleanor felt a strange sense of clarity. She had come west seeking security, a practical arrangement to save herself from destitution. Instead, she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for, a cause that awakened her sense of justice, and a partner who, despite their brief acquaintance, seemed willing to stand beside her. Whatever came next, Eleanor knew with sudden certainty that her decision to answer James Blackwood's advertisement had set her on a path far different and far more significant than she could have imagined. Pastor Williams arrived at the Blackwood Ranch that Sunday as expected, his saddlebags bulging with Bibles and pamphlets for the scattered families in his circuit. He was a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, seemingly unbothered by the harsh travel conditions his calling demanded. Miss Hayes, he greeted Eleanor warmly. James mentioned in his letter that you'd arrived safely. I trust. The territory hasn't proven too overwhelming. It's been enlightening, Pastor, Eleanor replied, offering him coffee. The wedding ceremony was simple but dignified, held in the ranch house's main room with Miguel and Tomas Gonzalez serving as witnesses. Eleanor wore her best dress, a deep blue traveling outfit she'd carefully preserved for special occasions. James had shaved meticulously and donned a clean white shirt with his least worn trousers. As they exchanged vows, Eleanor found herself studying the man who was becoming her husband. His hands were steady as he placed a simple gold band on her finger, an heirloom, he'd explained, that had belonged to his mother. His eyes, when they met hers, were honest and direct. Not love, perhaps, but respect, a foundation that could bear weight. After a modest celebration meal, Pastor Williams prepared to continue his circuit. Before departing, he drew James aside for a private word. Eleanor noticed the grave expressions of both men, but didn't intrude. Later, as they cleared away the dishes, James finally spoke. Williams says Holloway's been making moves all across the territory. 3 smaller ranches near Willow Creek have sold out in the past month. Pressure tactics? Eleanor asked. Likely. James set down a plate with deliberate care. Williams also said there's talk in town about the Apache problem. Holloway's men have been spreading stories, exaggerated accounts of stolen cattle, threats to settlers. That's absurd, Eleanor said. The village is peaceful. Truth isn't. The point. Holloway's creating a narrative that makes removing them seem justified, even necessary. James sighed. We need to act quickly if we're going to help them. The next morning, they rode together to Copper Creek. James had business at the bank, while Eleanor planned to visit the land office to examine records related to the Apache territory. The land office was a cramped, dusty room attached to the sheriff's office. A bored clerk barely looked up when Eleanor entered. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'd like to see any surveying records or land claims for the Eastern Creek watershed, particularly near Blackwood Ranch." The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, seemed surprised by the request. "That's official business, ma'am. Are you representing someone?" "My husband, James Blackwood. I'm Mrs. Blackwood." The name still felt new on her tongue. Recognition flickered in the clerk's eyes. "The Eastern bride. Heard you'd arrived." He hesitated. "I'll need Mr. Blackwood's written permission to show you those records." Eleanor maintained her composed expression. I understand. Would you perhaps know who currently holds the most recent surveys? I believe Mr. Holloway has been acquiring properties in that area. The clerk's posture stiffened. Mr. Holloway's business is handled directly through the territorial offices in Santa Fe. I see. And the Apache settlement east of Blackwood Ranch. What is their legal status? Indians don't have legal status on undesignated lands, ma'am. The clerk's tone had cooled considerably. If you'll excuse me, I have a filing to complete. Eleanor left the office, frustrated but not surprised. As she walked toward the bank to meet James, a voice called out, "Mrs. Blackwood." She turned to see a woman hurrying toward her, middle-aged, plainly but neatly dressed, with intelligent eyes and a determined mouth. "I'm Sarah Montgomery. My husband Robert runs the newspaper." She gestured toward a small building with a hand-painted sign, "Copper Creek Chronicle." "I couldn't help overhearing your questions at the land office. Perhaps we could talk?" The newspaper office was cluttered but organized, the scent of ink and paper permeating everything. Robert Montgomery, a bearded man with a printer's apron, nodded distractedly at Eleanor before returning to his press. "Don't mind him," Sarah said, clearing papers from a chair. "He's rushing to get tomorrow's edition ready. Now, you were asking about the Apache land and Holloway." "You seem well informed," Eleanor observed. "In a town this size, everyone knows everyone's business. But not everyone prints it." Sarah's smile was wry. "Robert and I came here 5 years ago from Chicago. We believed the frontier needed honest reporting, not just boosterism and advertisements. Has that made you popular?" "Hardly, but we've earned respect from some. Others." She shrugged. "Let's just say Mr. Holloway cancelled his advertisements after our piece questioning the water rights redistribution plan. For the next hour, Sarah filled Eleanor in on Victor Holloway's operations. He had arrived in the territory 3 years earlier, flush with Eastern investors' money and connections to territorial officials. His vision was ambitious, a cattle empire spanning thousands of acres, with complete control of water access throughout the region. "The Apache village sits at a critical juncture," Sarah explained. "Their portion of the creek provides water to 3 different watersheds during the spring melt. Control that, and you control ranching possibilities for miles around." "But they've been there for generations," Eleanor protested. "Surely that counts for something." Sarah's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Not without documentation it doesn't, and certainly not for Indians." "There must be some recourse," Eleanor insisted. "Some way to establish their prior claim." Sarah hesitated. "There might be. Years ago, before the territory changed hands, a Spanish land grant designated certain areas as protected for indigenous peoples. The original documents were filed in Santa Fe, but copies existed. One was supposedly kept by the Catholic mission that once stood near here. Where is it now? The mission was abandoned during the Apache Wars. Most records were taken to Santa Fe, but local legend says the priest hid important documents somewhere on the mission grounds." Sarah smiled at Eleanor's expression. "It's probably just a story." "Or it might be true," Eleanor countered. "Where exactly was this mission?" "About a day's ride northwest of here. Not much left now, but ruins." Eleanor met James at the bank as planned, her mind racing with possibilities. His business had been productive. He'd secured an extension on his loan payments, buying them time to address the Apache situation before needing to focus on ranch finances. As they rode home, Eleanor shared what she'd learned from Sarah Montgomery. James listened thoughtfully. "The old mission ruins," he mused. "I passed them while tracking stray cattle. Not much left, as Sarah said, but if there's even a chance of finding documentation that could help the Apache case, we should go there." Eleanor said decisively, "Search the ruins." James studied her with that now familiar look, surprise mingled with growing respect. "It won't be easy terrain, and Holloway has men watching the main trails." "Then we'll take the less traveled paths," Eleanor replied. The East had taught her determination. The West was teaching her boldness. They informed the Gonzalez brothers of their plans, arranging for them to oversee the ranch during the 2-day absence. Then, before returning home, they made one more stop in town, at Tucker's general store, where Eleanor purchased sturdy riding clothes more practical than her Eastern dresses. Back at the ranch, Eleanor wrote a quick note to Nahimana, explaining their plan to search for documents that might help secure the Apache claim to their land. She asked Miguel to deliver it discreetly to the village. "Be careful," he warned as he took the folded paper. "Holloway's men, they watch the trails now. Yesterday, I saw 2 of them near the north pasture." That evening, as Eleanor packed supplies for their journey, she found James studying a map at the kitchen table. "There's an old hunting trail here," he said, tracing a faint line with his finger. "It adds half a day to the journey, but keeps us away from the main routes where Holloway's men patrol." Eleanor set down her mending and examined the map. "Will the mission ruins be difficult to search? Parts of the structure collapsed years ago. The remaining walls are unstable." He glanced at her. "It's not too late to reconsider. This isn't what you came west for." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Actually, I'm beginning to think it might be exactly what I came west for." At his questioning look, she continued, "In Boston, I watched my father's business destroyed by men who manipulated the system, who used their power to take what wasn't theirs. I felt helpless then. I don't intend to feel that way again." James nodded slowly. "We leave at first light." They departed. Before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as they rode away from the ranch house. Eleanor, dressed in her new practical attire, split skirt, sturdy boots, and a man's shirt altered to fit her frame, felt a strange exhilaration, despite the seriousness of their mission. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they followed. The hunting trail James had identified. By midday, they were traversing a landscape of jutting red rocks and deep arroyos, the sun beating down mercilessly. Eleanor's Eastern upbringing had never prepared her for such conditions, but she rode without complaint, focusing on the steady rhythm of her horse's gait. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, keeping their fire small to avoid detection. As they shared a simple meal of beans and hardtack, conversation flowed more easily than it had at the ranch. Perhaps it was the shared purpose of their journey, or perhaps the remoteness of their surroundings stripped away some of the formality between them. "You ride well," James commented. "Better than I expected." "My father believed women should know how to ride properly, not just perch side saddle for show," Eleanor replied. "It was one of his more progressive notions." "Tell me about him," James said, surprising her. It was the first time he'd asked about her past. Eleanor stared into the small flame. He was brilliant with numbers but too trusting with people. He built his shipping business from nothing, only to see it destroyed by competitors who didn't play fair. A familiar ache tightened her throat. He died believing he was a failure, that he'd failed my mother's memory and my future. "And your mother died when I was 12, consumption." Eleanor poked at the fire with a stick. "She was the gentle one, always saw the best in people." James nodded, his face thoughtful in the flickering light. "My parents had a small farm in Pennsylvania. Nothing grand, but enough to live on. Both died within a year of each other, while I was fighting in Tennessee. By the time I returned, the farm had been sold for taxes. Is that why you came west?" "Partly." His expression grew distant. "The war changed things, changed me. Couldn't see myself returning to that life." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "What about you? If your father's business had survived, would you be sitting by a campfire in Apache territory right now?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Probably not. I'd likely be married to the son of one of my father's business associates. living in a fine house in Boston, attending concerts and literary salons, raising children who would follow the same path. Do you regret the change in circumstances? I regret my father's pain, his loss of dignity. She looked up at the vast canopy of stars above them, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in the east. But this path, no, I don't think I regret it. They reached the mission ruins by mid-afternoon the next day. The remains of the stone structure stood lonely against the sky, one wall partially collapsed, the roof long gone. Desert plants had reclaimed much of the compound, threading through cracks in the masonry and clustering around the base of the walls. "It's larger than I expected," Eleanor said as they approached. These missions were built to serve entire communities. This one was abandoned during the conflicts of the 1850s. James surveyed the ruins critically. If there are hidden documents, they could be anywhere. We should start with what would have been the priests' quarters and the chapel. They worked, methodically searching crumbling niches and collapsed sections of flooring. The sun beat down relentlessly, and dust clogged their nostrils and coated their skin. By late afternoon, they had found nothing but fragments of pottery and the rusted remains of metal hinges. Maybe Sarah's information was just a legend after all, Eleanor said, wiping sweat from her forehead. James didn't respond immediately, his attention caught by something near what had once been the altar. "Look at this." He knelt, brushing away debris from a section of stone flooring. "These tiles are different from the others, more carefully laid." Together they cleared the area, revealing a pattern of tiles that indeed seemed distinct from the rough flooring elsewhere in the ruins. As the design emerged, Eleanor noticed something else. The mortar between these tiles is different too. Newer, perhaps. James nodded, using his knife to probe the seams. Someone reset these relatively recently. The blade caught on something, and he worked more carefully. There's a space underneath. With focused effort, they managed to lift one of the tiles, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it from moisture, was a metal box. James lifted it carefully. It wasn't locked, and the hinges creaked as he opened it. Inside lay several documents, the paper yellowed but intact, covered in faded Spanish script. "Can you read any of it?" Eleanor asked, peering. "Over his shoulder, some," James replied. "My Spanish is limited, but I recognize this symbol here." He pointed to an official-looking seal. "It's the mark of the Spanish Crown's land office. And these names," he indicated a list of indigenous tribes, "include the local Apache bands." Eleanor's heart quickened. Could this be the land grant Sarah mentioned? It could be, but we'll need someone who can translate it properly. And then we'll need to get it to the territorial offices in Santa Fe before Holloway's 2-week deadline expires. They carefully rewrapped the documents and secured them in James's saddlebag. As they prepared to leave the ruins, a movement on the distant ridge caught Eleanor's attention. "James," she said quietly, nodding toward the silhouettes of riders outlined against the sky. His expression hardened. "Holloway's men. They must have picked up our trail." He quickly assessed their options. "We can't outrun them with both of us on tired horses." "What do we do?" James's decision was swift. "You take the documents and the stronger horse. Head southeast toward the Apache village. They'll help you reach Santa Fe. And you? I'll lead them away. North toward the mountains. Create a diversion." Eleanor wanted to protest, but recognized the logic. The documents were what mattered now. "Will you be safe?" "Holloway wants to intimidate, not create a murder charge." James checked his rifle, then secured it to his saddle. "But just in case, take this." He handed her his revolver. The weight of it was unfamiliar in her hands. "I've never fired one. Point and squeeze the trigger. It's already loaded." His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then, surprising her, he leaned forward and kissed her, briefly but with unmistakable intent. "Get those documents to Santa Fe, Eleanor." They separated at the eastern edge of the mission compound, James riding boldly north in full view of the distant riders, while Eleanor slipped away southeast, using the rugged terrain for cover. She heard shouts behind her as Holloway's men spotted James and gave chase exactly as he'd planned. Riding hard through unfamiliar territory, Eleanor kept her focus on the landmarks James had hastily pointed out: a distinctive mesa, a lightning-struck tree, a rock formation that resembled a seated figure. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in dramatic oranges and purples, when she spotted smoke rising from the valley ahead. The Apache village. As she approached, she saw several men move to intercept her, weapons ready. She reined in her exhausted horse, raising one hand to show she meant no harm. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood," she called out, "James's wife. I will bring news for Hanska." Recognition dawned on one man's face: Kitchi, Nahimana's husband, whom she'd met briefly during her visit to the village. "Where is James?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "Creating a diversion. Holloway's men were following us." She patted the saddlebag. "We found documents at the old mission, Spanish land grants that might protect your people's claim to this land." Kitchi's expression remained guarded, but he nodded. "Come, Hanska will want to hear this." The village was tense, clearly prepared for trouble. Children were nowhere to be seen, presumably kept safe in the dwellings. Women worked with deliberate calm, but Eleanor noticed weapons placed strategically within reach. Hanska emerged from his wickiup as Eleanor approached, his aged face betraying concern when he saw her arrive alone. "James?" he asked simply. "Leading. Holloway's men away from the documents we found." Eleanor dismounted, her legs cramping after the hard ride. "We may have proof of your people's right to this land." Interest flickered in the old man's eyes. "Show me." Inside his dwelling, illuminated by a small fire, Eleanor carefully unwrapped the documents. Hanska examined them with surprising familiarity. "I have seen papers like these before, as a young man," he said. "When the Spanish still claimed this territory, they granted our people rights to hunt and live on these lands." He traced the faded script with a weathered finger. "But will the Americans honor what the Spanish promised?" "They should," Eleanor said. "Under the treaty that transferred the territory, pre-existing land rights were to be respected. The problem has been proving those rights existed." She tapped the documents. "This could be that proof, but we need to get it to the territorial offices in Santa Fe before Holloway's deadline expires." Nahimana, who had joined them, spoke up. "Santa Fe is 5 days' hard ride from here, and Holloway's men watch the trails," Kitchi added. Eleanor felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down, but pushed it aside. "Is there someone here who can translate these properly? Someone who reads Spanish?" An older man named Makia was summoned, a former scout who had worked with both Spanish and American forces in his youth and learned their languages. While Makia carefully went through the documents, Nahimana brought Eleanor food and water. "You are very brave," she said quietly. "Or very foolish, perhaps both." Eleanor managed a tired smile. "I've been told that before. Usually the foolish part." "Where will you go now? Holloway's men will be watching for you as well as James." Eleanor considered the question. "To Santa Fe with these documents. It's the only way to stop the eviction." She glanced around the dwelling. "But I'll need help getting there." Hanska, who had been listening silently, nodded. "We will help you, not just for our sake, but for James, who has been our friend, and for you, who have become one." As the night deepened, plans were made. Makia confirmed that the documents indeed established a protected status for the Apache lands, a status that should still be legally binding. 2 young men from the village would accompany Eleanor to Santa Fe, taking routes known only to the Apache that would avoid Holloway's patrols. But one question remained unanswered as Eleanor prepared for sleep on a blanket near the fire. What had happened to James? Had he successfully led Holloway's men away? Was he safe? Or had her impulsive journey west led not to security, but to the loss of a man she was only beginning to understand, perhaps even to care for? In the quiet darkness, Eleanor clutched the wedding ring on her finger and made a silent promise. She would get these documents to Santa Fe. She would secure the Apache village's future. And then she would find James Blackwood. The husband she hardly knew yet felt bound to, in ways that transcended their brief acquaintance and practical arrangement. The West had changed her, she realized, and this journey was far from over. Dawn broke over the Apache village with a wash of pale gold light. Eleanor had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with images of James pursued by shadowy riders. She rose and stepped outside Hanska's wickiup to find the village already active, preparing for her departure to Santa Fe. Two young Apache men, Nashota and Wapi, were checking supplies and weapons near the edge of the settlement. They would be her guides and protectors on the journey, chosen for their knowledge of hidden trails and their skill at moving undetected through the territory. "We leave when the sun clears the ridge," Nashota told her, his English clear but clipped. He was the older of the two, perhaps 25, with intense eyes that missed nothing. Eleanor nodded, then turned as Nahimana approached, carrying a bundle of clothing. "You cannot travel as a white woman," Nahimana explained, offering the bundle. "You must look at Apache. Safer." The disguise was practical, a long skirt of soft deerskin, a loose blouse and a woven blanket to wear as a shawl. Nahimana helped her change, then studied her critically. "Your hair," she said, reaching for Eleanor's neatly pinned tresses. With deft movements, she unbound Eleanor's hair, then rebraided it in the Apache style. Finally, she mixed a paste of earth and herbs, applying it to Eleanor's face and hands to darken her fair skin. "Bend your shoulders forward," she instructed. "Walk soft. Keep your eyes down when others are near." She stepped back, assessing the transformation. "Not perfect, but better. From a distance, you will pass." As they prepared to leave, Hanska approached Makya, who carried the precious documents, now carefully wrapped in waterproof hide. "You carry our future," Hanska said solemnly, as Makya transferred the package to Eleanor's saddlebag. "But not only ours. Your husband's ranch also depends on the water rights these papers protect." "I understand," Eleanor replied. She had slept little, thinking about the interconnection of fates, the Apache village, the Blackwood ranch, her own future, all hanging in balance. "There is something else," Hanska continued. "News came in the night. James Blackwood was seen being taken to Holloway's main ranch." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Is he hurt?" The messenger did not know, only that he was captured after leading Holloway's men away from your trail. Her determination hardened. James had sacrificed his freedom, perhaps more, to ensure the documents reached safety. She would not let that sacrifice be in vain. "We will succeed," she told Hanska with more confidence than she felt, "both for your people and for James." They departed as planned when the sun cleared the eastern ridge, traveling single file on a barely visible trail that wound through dense juniper stands before ascending into rockier terrain. Eleanor's horse, a sturdy Apache pony provided to replace her exhausted mount, moved surely along the difficult path. Nashota led, while Wapi brought up the rear, both men alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. They traveled in near silence, speaking only when necessary, and then in hushed tones. Eleanor found the quiet oddly comforting, allowing her to focus on the journey and push aside fears about James's fate. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley containing the Apache village, and further in the distance, the Blackwood ranch. From this elevation, the landscape revealed itself as a complex network of watersheds and grazing lands. Eleanor understood more clearly why Holloway coveted this region. Controlling it meant controlling the future of ranching for miles around. "How much farther to Santa Fe?" she asked during a brief rest. "5 days," Nashota replied. "Maybe 4 if we push hard and have no trouble." The immensity of the journey ahead settled over her. Holloway's deadline for the Apache evacuation was less than 2 weeks away. Even if they reached Santa Fe quickly, navigating the territorial bureaucracy would take time they might not have. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow beneath a sandstone overhang. No fire was lit. They ate, dried meat and drank water from canteens, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. "Why do you help?" Wapi asked suddenly. He was younger than Nashota, perhaps 20, with a more open curiosity. "White women don't usually care about Apache land." Eleanor considered the question. "It began with a sense of justice," she said. "Finally, what's happening to your people isn't right, but now—" She thought of James, of the ranch, of the connections she'd formed in her brief time in the territory. "Now it's also about protecting what I'm beginning to think of as home." Wapi nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. The next morning brought complications. As they descended from the higher elevations, Nashota spotted dust clouds to the south. Riders, moving fast. "Holloway's men?" Eleanor asked, squinting at the distant figures. "Maybe, or army patrol." Nashota's expression was grim. "Either way, not good for us. We go north, then circle back." The detour added precious hours to their journey, forcing them through rugged terrain that slowed their progress considerably. By evening, Eleanor's muscles ached from the constant tension of navigating difficult trails, but she voiced no complaints. Each mile brought them closer to Santa Fe, closer to help for the Apache village, and hopefully for James. They made camp in a dry streambed, concealed by high banks on either side. As Wapi secured the horses, Nashota pulled Eleanor aside. "Tomorrow, we will reach the trading post at Juniper Springs," he explained. "Last chance for water before a long stretch, but dangerous. Many eyes. Holloway's men might be watching it." Nashota nodded. "And others who would notice Apache with white woman. You must be very careful. Speak little. Stay back." Eleanor understood. The risk. Her disguise might pass casual inspection, but it wouldn't withstand scrutiny from anyone familiar with the Apache people. The trading post appeared around midday the following day, a collection of rough buildings surrounding a natural spring. Several wagons were already gathered there, along with a handful of riders watering their horses. Nashota gave final instructions as they approached. "I will get water and supplies. You stay with horses. Wapi watches from the ridge." He pointed to a nearby elevation where Wapi had already disappeared, positioning himself as a lookout. Eleanor kept her head down as Nashota led their horses to the edge of the activity. She remained mounted, shrouded in her blanket despite the heat, while he took their canteens to fill at the spring. From beneath her lowered lashes, she observed the trading post's inhabitants, a mix of settlers, traders, and what appeared to be ranch hands. No immediate sign of Holloway's men, but the knot of tension in her stomach didn't ease. A commotion near the main building drew her attention. 2 men had emerged, one a burly, red-faced trader, the other a well-dressed gentleman whose bearing screamed authority. Eleanor instinctively pulled her blanket closer, but not before catching fragments of their conversation. "Anduri's reward for information. Blackwood woman. Papers valuable to territorial interests." Her pulse quickened. They were looking for her specifically. Holloway must have guessed she'd recovered documents from the mission and was now attempting to intercept her before she reached Santa Fe. Nashota returned with the filled canteens, his expression unchanged but his movements slightly quicker. He had noticed something too. Without speaking, he remounted and led them away from the trading post at an unhurried pace that nevertheless covered ground quickly. Only when they were well beyond sight of the outpost did he speak. "Trouble. I heard men talking. Holloway offers. Gold for Apache helping white woman, or for women alone. I overheard something similar, Eleanor confirmed. They know about the documents. Nashota's jaw tightened. We cannot use the main trails now, too dangerous. But we need to reach Santa Fe quickly, Eleanor protested. Better slow than dead, was his simple reply. Whoopi rejoined them as dusk approached, confirming their fears. Riders had left the trading post shortly after their departure, heading in multiple directions. The search for them was intensifying. That night, huddled in yet another makeshift camp without fire or comfort, Eleanor found herself fighting despair. The journey was taking longer than expected. Holloway's men were actively pursuing them, and James remained a captive. She withdrew the documents from their hiding place, studying the faded Spanish script by moonlight as if it might yield new insights. "You read this?" Whoopi asked, noticing her attention. "Not well. I recognize place names, dates." She traced a section where the Apache tribe was clearly named. "This establishes your people's right to the land and water." Whoopi nodded thoughtfully. "Old Chief Maca spoke of such papers," said Spanish soldiers. "Gave them long ago. No one believed." "Well, these will make people believe," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. Once we reached Santa Fe, the next day brought new challenges. A spring storm swept across the desert, bringing driving. Rain that reduced visibility and turned the trails to mud. They pressed on despite the conditions, all three now acutely aware of how precious each hour had become. By late afternoon, the storm had passed, but it left their clothing sodden and their spirits dampened. As they created a rise, Nashota abruptly signaled for them to halt. Before Eleanor could ask why, she heard it too. Voices carried on the wind from the valley below. Cautiously, they advanced to a position where they could observe without being seen. A small camp had been established near a stream. 4 men, their horses picketed nearby. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized 2 of them as riders who had been at the trading post. "Holloway's men," she whispered. "They're blocking our path." Nashota surveyed the situation with calculating eyes. "Too many to fight. We go around." "That will take hours we don't have," Eleanor protested. "Other choice?" Nashota challenged. Eleanor studied at the camp again. An idea began to form, desperate perhaps, but potentially effective. "We need a diversion, something to draw them away from their position." Whoopi's eyes lit with understanding. "Like James did for you." The reminder of James's sacrifice strengthened her resolve. "Exactly like that, but this time no one gets captured." Their plan took shape quickly. Using the remaining daylight, Whoopi would circle wide around the camp and then create a disturbance to the north, driving a small herd of wild horses they'd spotted earlier toward the stream crossing. In the confusion, Eleanor and Nashota would slip past to the south, rejoining Whoopi at a landmark pinnacle rock several miles ahead. As dusk deepened into night, they set the plan in motion. Eleanor and Nashota positioned themselves on a small rise, waiting for Whoopi's signal. The minutes stretched interminably, each sound from the camp below setting Eleanor's nerves on edge. Finally it came, a distant whinny, followed by the drumming of many hooves. The wild horses appeared at the far end of the valley, running hard, driven by Whoopi's expertly thrown stones and shouts. The men in the camp scrambled to secure their own mounts, which were pulling at their picket lines in response to the approaching herd. Shouts of alarm rose as the men realized their horses might break free and join the stampede. "Now," Nashota whispered, already moving down the slope. They stayed low, using the growing darkness and the chaos of the stampede as cover. Eleanor's heart pounded as they crossed the open ground between their hiding place and the trail beyond the camp. 50 yards, 30, 10. "Hey, there, by the rocks!" The shout froze Eleanor mid-stride. One of Holloway's men had spotted them, was now pointing in their direction. 2 others turned, reaching for weapons. "Run!" Nashota urged, pushing her forward. They abandoned stealth for speed, racing for the shelter of a boulder-strewn slope. Beyond the camp, shots rang out behind them, bullets whining off rocks uncomfortably close. Eleanor stumbled once, but kept her footing. Driven by desperation and fear, they reached the rocky slope and scrambled upward, using the terrain for cover as they climbed. More shots followed, but with less accuracy as darkness and distance increased. Finally, breathless and scraped from the climb, they reached a position of relative safety among a tumble of giant boulders. "They will follow," Nashota said grimly, checking that the precious documents were still secure. "But not tonight," Eleanor replied. "Not in the dark, on unfamiliar ground." At first light, they hunt again. He gestured toward a narrow cleft between boulders. "We rest here, then move before dawn." The night passed in uneasy vigilance, neither of them sleeping more than fitful moments. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they set out again, following a precipitous route along the rocky ridge that would be difficult to track. "Will Wappy find us?" Eleanor asked as they descended the far side of the ridge. "He knows where to go, and he knows these lands better than Holloway's men." By mid-morning, they had covered several miles of difficult terrain, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. They paused at a small seep spring to refill canteens, both scanning the landscape continuously for signs of danger. "How much farther to the meeting point with Wappy?" Eleanor asked. 2 hours, maybe less." Nashota pointed to a distinctive spire of rock visible on the horizon. "There." They had just resumed their journey when Nashota suddenly stiffened, raising a hand for silence. Eleanor froze, straining to hear what had alerted him. Then she caught it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats coming from the direction they were heading. "Holloway's men," she whispered. Nashota shook his head slightly. Different sounds, more horses, maybe soldiers. The approaching riders appeared. On the trail ahead, a patrol of U.S. cavalry, their blue uniforms distinct even at a distance. 8 men, led by an officer whose insignia gleamed in the sunlight. Eleanor felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The army might provide safe passage to Santa Fe, but they might also question an Apache man traveling with a woman of unclear status. And what of Wappy, who was supposed to meet them ahead? "What do we do?" she asked Nashota. He assessed the situation with a hunter's eye. "They have seen us already. Better to meet them than run." "But," he fixed her with an intense gaze, "you must speak. Be white woman again. Say I am your guide, hired by your husband." Eleanor nodded, hastily adjusting her clothing and wiping at the remaining earth paste on her face. She unbraided her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders in a more European style. The patrol approached cautiously, rifles not quite aimed at them but ready. The officer raised a hand, signaling his men to halt at a short distance. "Ma'am," he called, addressing Eleanor, "identify yourself if you please." Eleanor straightened her spine, summoning every ounce of her Boston upbringing. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, wife of James Blackwood of Copper Creek. This is Nashota, our guide. We're traveling to Santa Fe on urgent business concerning land." "Rights." The officer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lieutenant Michael Harrington, 7th Cavalry." He studied them with open curiosity. "You're a long way from established trails, Mrs. Blackwood." "We have reason to believe men employed by Victor Holloway are attempting to intercept us," Eleanor replied. "We've been taking less traveled routes for safety." At the mention of Holloway's name, something shifted in Harrington's expression. "Interesting. We've had reports of Holloway's men operating beyond their authority in this region, interfering with legal travelers, threatening homesteaders." Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. "Lieutenant, we're carrying documents of significant importance to the Territorial Land Office, Spanish land grants that establish prior claims for both my husband's ranch and the Apache settlement near Copper Creek. Mr. Holloway has been attempting to seize those lands through questionable means." Harrington dismounted, approaching them with a more measured demeanor. "May I see these documents?" Eleanor nodded to Nashota, who carefully withdrew the wrapped package from his saddlebag and presented it to Harrington. The lieutenant examined the papers with evident recognition of their significance. "These appear authentic," he said finally, "similar to documents I've seen in Santa Fe during land claim disputes." He refolded them carefully. "Mrs. Blackwood, I believe you may indeed have something worth the territorial governor's attention." "Then you'll help us reach Santa Fe?" Eleanor asked. "Better than that," Harrington replied. "We're under orders to investigate reports of illegal intimidation by private interests in this region. Your testimony and these documents could be valuable to that investigation." He gestured to one of his men. "Corporal Lewis will escort you directly to Santa Fe with a portion of our patrol. The rest of us will continue our assigned route." Relief washed through Eleanor, tempered by a new concern. "Lieutenant, there's something else. My husband, James Blackwood, has been detained by Holloway's men, and another of our guides, Whoopi, is supposed to meet us ahead. He's Apache as well." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "We'll keep an eye out for your other guide. As for your husband," his expression hardened slightly, "if Holloway is holding an American citizen against his will, that falls squarely within our jurisdiction to investigate." Within the hour, Eleanor and Nashota were traveling under escort. 4 soldiers commanded by Corporal Lewis, a steady, soft-spoken man who seemed genuinely interested in their story. The remaining soldiers, led by Lieutenant Harrington, had continued on their patrol route with a new purpose: investigating Holloway's operation and potentially locating James. The military escort drastically changed the nature of their journey. They now traveled open trails at a brisk pace, no longer needing to hide or take circuitous routes. With fresh horses provided from the patrol's remounts, they made excellent time. That evening at their camp, Eleanor found herself sharing the full story with Corporal Lewis, from her arrival as a mail-order bride to the discovery of Holloway's. He planned to seize the Apache lands and the desperate race to recover the Spanish documents. "You've shown remarkable courage, Mrs. Blackwood," Lewis commented when she had finished. "Many would have considered this situation none of their concern." "It became my concern when I decided to make this territory my home," Eleanor replied simply. She gazed into the campfire, worried for James never far from her thoughts. "Do you think Lieutenant Harrington will find my husband?" Lewis considered the question seriously. "Harrington is a good officer, thorough. If Holloway is holding Mr. Blackwood anywhere in this region, the lieutenant will locate him." He added another log to the fire. "And Holloway would be a fool to harm a rancher with legitimate property rights. That would escalate matters beyond land disputes into criminal territory." Eleanor took comfort in the corporal's assessment, though worry for James remained a constant companion. And what of Whoopi? Had he evaded Holloway's men? Would he make his way safely back to the Apache village? The remaining journey to Santa Fe passed swiftly under military escort. They crossed into more settled territory, where the landscape gradually transformed from desert wilderness to established farmlands and small settlements. By the afternoon of the second day, the territorial capital came into view, a sprawling adobe city nestled against foothills, its architecture a blend of Spanish, Mexican, and American influences. "The governor's offices are in the central plaza," Corporal Lewis explained as they rode into town. "But first, we should report to the military headquarters. Colonel Watson will want to hear your account firsthand." Eleanor nodded, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after days on the trail. The transformation from Boston society woman to frontier survivor was complete. Her borrowed Apache clothing dusty and worn, her hair windblown, her skin tanned by the relentless sun. Yet as they rode through Santa Fe's streets, drawing curious glances from townspeople, Eleanor felt a strange new confidence. She had traveled hundreds of miles through hostile territory, evaded pursuers, and secured vital documents that might save both the Apache village and her new home. Now, as they approached the military headquarters where her story would finally be heard by those with the power to act, Eleanor Blackwood, once a desperate mail-order bride with few options, straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. The final chapter of this journey was about to begin. Colonel Thomas Watson of the U.S. Army Territorial Command was not what Eleanor had expected. Rather than the stern military figure she had imagined, she found herself facing a thoughtful man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and a scholar's demeanor despite his uniform. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her, rising from behind his desk as Corporal Lewis ushered her into his office. "I understand you've had quite a journey." "Yes, Colonel," Eleanor replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance, the borrowed Apache clothing, trail dust, and general dishevelment. "Thank you for seeing me so promptly. Please sit." Watson gestured to a chair, then nodded to Lewis. "Ensure that Mrs. Blackwood's companion is comfortable in the anteroom." When they were alone, Watson leaned forward. "Corporal Lewis has given me a preliminary report, but I'd like to hear the full story from you directly." For the next hour, Eleanor recounted everything, from her arrival as James's mail-order bride to the discovery of Holloway's plans for the Apache lands, the recovery of the Spanish land grant documents, James's capture, and their perilous journey to Santa Fe. Watson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he sat back in his chair. "These documents," he said finally. "May I see them?" Eleanor carefully unwrapped the package Nashota had entrusted to her before they entered the colonel's office. The Spanish land grants, yellow with age but still legible, lay between them on the polished surface of Watson's desk. The colonel examined them with the care of someone accustomed to historical documents. "These appear authentic," he said after several minutes. "Similar to other Spanish grants that have been honored by the territorial government." Hope surged in Eleanor's chest. "Then they're sufficient to protect the Apache village and my husband's water rights." "Potentially, yes." Watson's expression was cautious. "But there are complications. Victor Holloway has powerful connections in the territorial administration. He's been instrumental in bringing Eastern investment to the region, something Governor Albright values highly." "More highly than justice?" Eleanor couldn't keep the edge from her voice. A ghost of a smile touched Watson's lips. "You speak your mind, Mrs. Blackwood." Refreshing in this political environment, he tapped the documents thoughtfully. "The fact is, these grants present a legal obstacle to Holloway's plans, regardless of his connections, but ensuring they're properly recognized will require presenting them to the Territorial Land Commissioner, and doing so before Holloway can mobilize opposition." "How quickly can that happen?" "The Commissioner is currently in the capital. I can arrange a meeting tomorrow morning." Watson studied her with a new assessment. "You should be present. Your testimony regarding how these documents were recovered will be important." Eleanor nodded, determination overriding her exhaustion. "And my husband? Is there anything that can be done to secure his release?" "Lieutenant Harrington is investigating as we speak. If Holloway is indeed holding an American citizen against his will, that constitutes a serious offense." Watson rose, signaling their meeting was concluding. "In the meantime, you need rest. I've arranged accommodations for you at the officers' quarters. Clean clothing will be provided and meals." "And Nashota?" Eleanor asked. "Your Apache guide will be well treated," Watson assured her, "though I recommend he return to his village soon. His presence in Santa Fe may attract unwanted attention from those who share Holloway's views of the indigenous population." As Eleanor was escorted to her temporary quarters, a Spartan but clean room in the officer's wing, she found her mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. She was close to securing protection for the Apache village, but James remained in danger, and Holloway, once he learned of her arrival in Santa Fe, would surely accelerate his efforts to undermine their case. A young female army nurse named Sarah helped Eleanor bathe and provided clean clothing, a simple dress donated by an officer's wife that fit well enough for propriety. The hot water and fresh attire revived her spirits somewhat, though worry for James kept her from true relaxation. "You've come such a long way," Sarah commented as she helped Eleanor comb the tangles from her hair. "All alone, through Apache territory. Weren't you frightened?" "There was little time for fear," Eleanor replied truthfully, "and the Apache were allies, not threats." Sarah's expression registered surprise. "That's not what most people say about them. Most people haven't lived alongside them," Eleanor said, "or seen the threat they face from men like Holloway." After a simple but nourishing meal brought to her room, Eleanor finally surrendered to sleep, her last thoughts of James and the uncertain days ahead. She awoke to sharp knocking. Disoriented momentarily, she called out, "Yes, who is it?" "Corporal Lewis, ma'am. Colonel Watson requests your presence immediately. There's been a development." Dread pooled in Eleanor's stomach as she hastily dressed. Had something happened to James? Or had Holloway somehow learned of her presence in Santa Fe? The colonel was pacing when she entered his office, his earlier scholarly calm replaced by focused energy. "Mrs. Blackwood, we've received word from Lieutenant Harrington. His patrol located your husband. Is he—" Eleanor couldn't complete the question. "Alive, yes. Being held at Holloway's main ranch compound under guard." Watson's expression hardened. "Harrington also reports that Holloway has apparently accelerated his timetable. He sent men to forcibly evict the Apache village immediately, rather than waiting for the 2-week deadline." Horror washed through her. "They won't leave willingly," precisely Colonel Watson's concern. "If the Apache resist, Holloway's men may use it as justification for violence." He gestured to a map spread on his desk. "Harrington's patrol is too small to intervene directly. He's requested reinforcements." "How soon can they reach the village?" "Not soon enough, I fear. Even leaving immediately. It would take a cavalry detachment 3 days to reach Copper Creek." Watson shook his head grimly. "By then, the damage may be done." Eleanor stared at the map, tracing the route from Santa Fe to the Apache village with her finger. "Then we must stop this through official channels immediately. The land commissioner, I've already sent word, requesting an emergency meeting this morning instead of tomorrow." Watson checked his pocket watch. "But there's more. Holloway himself arrived in Santa Fe last night, apparently on unrelated business. He doesn't yet know you're here or that we have the Spanish grants." A plan began forming in Eleanor's mind. "Then we have an advantage, the element of surprise. What are you suggesting? That we confront Holloway directly, with the land commissioner present? Show him the documents, make it clear his scheme has been exposed." Watson considered this. Risky, he might not back down easily. "But if he knows the army is aware of his activities, including holding my husband against his will, surely that changes his calculations?" Before Watson could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. His aide entered, looking tense. "Sir, Commissioner Daniels has arrived for the emergency meeting, and—" The young officer hesitated. "Mr. Victor Holloway is with him." Apparently they had a previously scheduled appointment. Eleanor and Watson exchanged glances. The confrontation would come sooner than expected. "Show them in," Watson directed, then turned quickly to Eleanor. "Stay calm. Let me lead the discussion initially." Commissioner Daniels entered first. A thin, bureaucratic man with spectacles and a perpetually harried expression. Behind him came Holloway, taller and broader than Eleanor remembered from their brief encounter at the Apache village, his prosperous appearance magnified by an expensive suit and confident bearing. Holloway stopped short when he saw Eleanor, recognition and alarm flashing across his features before being masked by calculated charm. "Well, this is unexpected," he said smoothly. "Mrs. Blackwood, isn't it? I heard you'd gone missing. Your husband has been quite concerned." I imagine he has, Eleanor replied coldly, particularly while being held prisoner at your ranch. Holloway's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. A misunderstanding, I assure you. Mr. Blackwood is a guest, under my protection, after an unfortunate incident with some Apache troublemakers. Commissioner. Daniels looked confused. Colonel, what is this about? I was told there was an urgent matter regarding land claims. Indeed there is, Watson replied, gesturing to the documents spread on his desk. Mrs. Blackwood has recovered Spanish land grant papers that directly impact recent decisions made by your office. Daniels approached the desk, examining the papers with evident surprise. These appear to be original Spanish Crown grants. Where were they found? Hidden in the ruins of the old mission near Copper Creek, Eleanor explained. They establish protected status for the Apache settlement and confirm water rights that Mr. Holloway has been attempting to seize through questionable means. Holloway's composure slipped momentarily. Those papers are irrelevant. Ancient Spanish claims have no bearing on current territorial decisions. Actually, they do, Daniels countered, surprising Eleanor with his firmness. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo specifically protects pre-existing land grants. If these are authentic, and they appear to be, they would indeed supersede any recent land office decisions. Holloway's expression darkened. Commissioner, we've discussed the development plans for that region extensively. The economic benefits to the territory cannot override legal obligations, Watson interjected, particularly when enforcement involves the illegal detention of American citizens and threats of violence against indigenous peoples under federal protection. Holloway turned to Watson, his mask of civility slipping further. You're overstepping your authority, Colonel. Military matters are separate from territorial land management. Not when they involve potential breaches of the peace, Watson replied, evenly. Lieutenant Harrington's patrol has reported that your men are currently attempting to forcibly remove the Apache from their lands apparently protected by these grants. Commissioner Daniels looked alarmed. Is this true, Mr. Holloway? I authorized no such action ahead of the designated date, and certainly not before the appeals process was complete. Holloway hesitated, visibly calculating his options. Eleanor recognized the moment of vulnerability and pressed the advantage. Mr. Holloway's men have my husband, Commissioner. They've threatened the Apache village with violence, and now we have documents proving their claim to the land is valid. She stepped forward, meeting Holloway's gaze directly. How do you imagine the territorial governor or the federal authorities will react when they learn of these actions? A tense silence filled the room. Holloway's gaze shifted between the three faces confronting him, assessing his increasingly limited options. There appears to have been a misunderstanding, he said finally, his tone carefully modulated. Perhaps overzealous employees acting without proper authorization. A convenient explanation, Watson observed dryly. Holloway ignored the comment, focusing on Daniels. Commissioner, I propose we take time to properly authenticate these Spanish documents. Historical claims are complex matters requiring careful examination. Daniels nodded thoughtfully. Authentication is indeed necessary. However, until that process is complete, the status quo must be maintained. No action can be taken regarding the Apache settlement or adjacent water rights. And my husband, Eleanor demanded. Holloway spread his hands in a gesture of conciliation. As I said, a misunderstanding. I'll send word immediately for Mr. Blackwood to be escorted to Santa Fe, where this confusion can be resolved. Colonel Watson stepped forward. I believe military escort would be more appropriate. I'll dispatch riders to Lieutenant Harrington, with orders to secure Mr. Blackwood's release and ensure the Apache village remains undisturbed. Holloway's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. As you wish, Colonel, I have nothing to hide. Eleanor didn't believe that for a moment, but she recognized the tactical retreat for what it was. Holloway was cutting his losses, at least temporarily. "Commissioner," Daniels gathered the Spanish documents carefully. "I'll have these registered officially today and begin the authentication process. Mrs. Blackwood, you'll need to provide formal testimony regarding their discovery." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. As the meeting concluded, Holloway approached Eleanor while Watson was speaking with Daniels. His voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "Impressive, Mrs. Blackwood. From mail-order bride to legal adversary in a matter of weeks." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But this setback is temporary. I have investments to protect and connections you can't imagine." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Then you should know that copies of those documents and a full account of your actions have been secured with multiple parties." A bluff, but one delivered with convincing certainty. "Any misfortune befalling me, my husband, or the Apache village would trigger their immediate delivery to the territorial governor and federal authorities." Holloway studied her with a new assessment. "James Blackwood chose better than he knew when he sent for you." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Until our next encounter, Mrs. Blackwood." After Holloway and Daniels departed, Eleanor sagged into a chair, the tension of the confrontation leaving her drained. "Effectively handled," Watson commented, pouring her a glass of water. "Particularly that final exchange. I couldn't hear what was said, but Holloway's expression was illuminating." "He won't give up easily," Eleanor said, accepting the water gratefully. "No, but he's been outmaneuvered for now." Watson returned to his desk. "I've already drafted orders for Harrington. Riders will depart within the hour with instructions to secure your husband's release and establish a temporary protective presence at the Apache village." Relief washed through Eleanor. How soon might they reach the village? "The riders should rendezvous with Harrington's patrol tomorrow. Depending on where they're positioned, they could reach the village by the following morning." Watson's expression remained serious. "But Holloway's men have a head start. There's still a risk of conflict before our forces arrive." Eleanor thought of Nahimana, Hanska, and the others, people who had shown her kindness and trust despite every reason for suspicion. "I need to warn them somehow." Watson considered this. "Your Apache guide, Nashota, could potentially travel faster than military riders. If he left immediately by the most direct route, he would do it," Eleanor said with certainty, "for his people." Within the hour, Nashota had been briefed and provided with fresh supplies. His mission was clear: reach the village ahead of Holloway's men and warn the people to avoid confrontation until the army patrol arrived with official orders protecting their land. "Tell them we have succeeded," Eleanor told him as he prepared to depart. "The Spanish papers have been accepted by the commissioner. Their home is protected." Nashota nodded, his usually impassive expression softening briefly. "You have fought for my people as if they were your own." "They welcomed me when they had no reason to," Eleanor replied. "That makes them my people too, in a way." As Nashota rode out of Santa Fe, Eleanor turned her attention to the next critical task, providing formal testimony for Commissioner Daniels regarding the discovery of the Spanish grants. The authentication process would take time, but the initial registration of the documents was enough to halt Holloway's immediate plans. That evening, Eleanor was summoned again to Colonel Watson's office. She found him reviewing dispatches, his expression grave. "News?" she asked, hope and dread mingling in her chest. "Reports from outlying settlements," Watson replied. "Holloway departed Santa Fe shortly after our meeting, traveling north rather than toward Copper Creek." Eleanor frowned. "Why north? His operations are west of here." "Exactly the question that concerns me." Watson tapped the dispatch thoughtfully. He has other holdings near the Colorado border, mining interests primarily, and connections among less reputable elements there. You think he's gathering reinforcements? It's possible. A man like Holloway, accustomed to power and its exercise. Watson shook his head. He wouldn't accept defeat easily. The implication hung heavily between them. Their victory might be temporary, the danger to James and the Apache village not yet past. What can we do? Eleanor asked. Continue with the legal process. The land commissioner is expediting authentication of the Spanish grants. Watson rose, moving to a map mounted on his wall. I've also requested additional troops from Fort Union to reinforce Harrington's patrol. They should arrive within the week. A week may be too late if Holloway is gathering men. Watson nodded grimly. Which is why I've made a decision that goes beyond strict military protocol. Tomorrow, you and I will depart for Copper Creek ourselves, with a small but well-armed escort. I want to personally ensure the situation is secured before Holloway can reorganize. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Colonel. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Blackwood. We're still facing considerable uncertainty. His expression softened slightly. But your courage in this matter has been remarkable. Most mail-order brides simply adapt to their new circumstances, whatever they may be. Perhaps that's what I'm doing, Eleanor replied. Adapting to the realization that my new home is worth fighting for. They departed at dawn the following day. Eleanor, Colonel Watson, and 6 hand-selected soldiers. The small detachment traveled light, pushing their mounts at a pace that ate up miles quickly. Eleanor, already accustomed to hard riding from her journey with Nashota and Wapi, kept up without complaint. Watson proved an unexpectedly comfortable traveling companion, sharing stories of his 20 years in the territories during rest breaks. He had originally come west as a young lieutenant, expecting a brief posting before returning to Eastern civilization. Instead, he had found himself increasingly drawn to the complex interplay of cultures and the raw beauty of the landscape. Much like yourself, he observed as they made camp the first evening. The West changes people, either breaks them or reveals strength they never knew they possessed. Eleanor thought of her transformation, from the desperate daughter of a ruined Boston businessman to a woman who had crossed hostile territory, confronted powerful enemies, and navigated territorial politics to protect both her new husband and an Apache village. The circumstances reveal what was already there, she replied, just waiting for necessity to bring it forth. Watson smiled appreciatively. A philosophical perspective. Your husband is fortunate indeed. The thought of James, still captive, unaware of her efforts on his behalf, sent a renewed surge of determination through Eleanor. They had been married only briefly before circumstances separated them, yet she felt a growing connection to this man who had accepted her sight unseen and then revealed unexpected depths of character. On the 3rd day of their journey, they encountered a lone rider approaching from the direction of Copper Creek. A military courier dispatched by Lieutenant Harrington. The news he brought was mixed. Harrington's patrol reached the Apache village. Just as Holloway's men were preparing to enforce evacuation, the courier reported. There was tension, but no violence. The Apache had been warned in advance, apparently by your guide, ma'am. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Nashota had succeeded. And my husband, she asked anxiously. Lieutenant Harrington sent a detachment to Holloway's ranch as ordered, the courier continued. But Mr. Blackwood was no longer there. According to the ranch hands, he had been transferred to another location the previous day. Eleanor's momentary relief crumbled. Where? They claimed not to know, ma'am. Just that armed men had arrived with orders to move him. Colonel Watson's expression darkened. Holloway is playing a deeper game, moving Blackwood to a location where he's both hostage and leveraged. Or worse, Eleanor said, giving voice to her deepest fear. Holloway is unscrupulous, but not foolish. Watson reassured her. Harming your husband would transform a land dispute into a capital crime. He knows that line. The courier had more information. Harrington's men had found evidence that Holloway was indeed gathering allies, hired guns and disaffected ranchers who resented both Apache presence and military authority. Intelligence suggested they were establishing a position near Cherry Creek, midway between Copper Creek and the Apache village. A show of force, Watson mused, demonstrating that even with temporary legal setbacks, he remains a power in the region. They increased their pace, pushing toward Copper Creek with renewed urgency. The tactical situation was balanced precariously. The Apache village secured for now by Harrington's patrol, but James's whereabouts unknown, and Holloway assembling what amounted to a private army. As they created a familiar rise on the afternoon of the fourth day, Eleanor caught her first glimpse of Copper Creek in the distance, the small collection of buildings shimmering in the heat. Somewhere beyond lay the Blackwood Ranch and the Apache village, and James, if he still lived. The final confrontation was approaching, and Eleanor Blackwood, once a desperate mail-order bride seeking any port in a storm, steeled herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Copper Creek stirred with unusual activity as Colonel Watson's small detachment rode down the main street. Townspeople gathered on boardwalks, conversations hushing as they recognized Eleanor riding alongside the uniformed officer. News of the confrontation at the Apache village had clearly reached town ahead of them. They dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, a modest building with a recently painted sign. Sheriff Frank Miller emerged, a weathered man with a silver mustache and watchful eyes. "Colonel Watson," he greeted, nodding respectfully. "Didn't expect Army presence in town today." His gaze shifted to Eleanor. "Mrs. Blackwood, heard you'd gone to Santa Fe. Quite a journey." "A necessary one, Sheriff," Eleanor replied. "Have you had news of my husband?" Miller's expression revealed nothing. "Best discuss that inside." The sheriff's office was spare but orderly. A desk, several chairs, a gun rack, and 3 cells visible through a barred door at the rear. Miller gestured for them to sit, then poured coffee from a pot kept warm on a small stove. "Situation's complicated," he said, settling behind his desk. "Got reports from Harrington's patrol about the standoff at the Apache settlement. Then Holloway's men came through town 2 days ago recruiting, offering good money for security. Work, they called it. Did many accept?" Watson asked. "Some. Not as many as Holloway likely hoped. Most folks here have enough sense to avoid getting between the army and a man like him." Miller sipped his coffee. "But there are always those hungry enough or angry enough to sign on." "And James Blackwood?" Eleanor pressed. "Do you know where he's being held?" Miller set down his cup. "Got word this morning. Holloway established a camp at Devil's Ridge, about 15 miles northeast of here. Your husband's reportedly there under guard." Eleanor felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that James was alive, fear for his continued safety, and determination to secure his freedom. "Devil's Ridge gives them a tactical advantage," Watson observed. "Defensible position, clear sightlines." Miller nodded grimly. "Holloway's sent word he wants to negotiate. Says he's willing to recognize the Apache claim if certain water rights are conceded to his operations. Claims he's acting in the territory's economic interests." "Negotiating with a hostage as leverage is extortion, not diplomacy," Watson replied coldly. "How many men does he have at this camp?" "Reports vary. 20, maybe 30. Some local, others brought in from his northern properties." Eleanor studied the 2 men, reading between their careful words. The situation had escalated beyond a simple land dispute into an armed standoff with potential for bloodshed. "What's your assessment, Sheriff?" she asked directly. Miller seemed to appreciate her straightforwardness. "Holloway's overplayed his hand. He's got money and connections, but kidnapping crosses a line the territorial government can't ignore. That said, he's backed himself into a corner now." Men like him don't surrender easily. Colonel Watson rose, moving to study a map hung on the sheriff's wall. Lieutenant Harrington's patrol is currently securing the Apache village. I've sent for reinforcements from Fort Union, but they won't arrive for several days, by which time this powder keg might have already exploded, Miller concluded. We need to resolve this without bloodshed, Eleanor insisted. James's life depends on it, as do the lives of everyone in that camp, including Holloway's misguided recruits. Watson turned from the map. I agree, Mrs. Blackwood, which is why I propose a parley. You mean to meet with Holloway directly? Miller asked. Surprised, with official authority and military escort, yes. Watson's expression was determined. Make it clear that his actions have drawn federal attention, not merely territorial. Offer him a path to retreat without loss of face. Eleanor considered the strategy. He'll expect concessions. He'll receive none regarding the Apache land or your husband's freedom, Watson assured her. But we might offer assurances regarding criminal prosecution if he stands down immediately. I should be part of this parley, Eleanor said firmly. Both men looked at her with similar expressions of concern. That would place you directly in harm's way, Watson objected. I'm already in harm's way, Eleanor countered, and my presence sends a message that I'm not intimidated, that the Spanish grants are secure in Santa Fe, and that this standoff gains him nothing. Miller studied her with new appreciation. She's got a point, Colonel. Holloway's expecting you to keep her safely behind army lines. Her appearance might unsettle him enough to create an opening. After further discussion, a plan took shape. Watson would send a messenger to Devil's Ridge, proposing a meeting at neutral ground the following morning, a flat area near Cottonwood Creek, midway between town and Holloway's camp. He would bring Eleanor and a small military escort, while Sheriff Miller would remain in Copper Creek to maintain order. As dusk settled over the town, Eleanor found herself provided with a room at the small hotel. The accommodations were modest but clean, a far cry from what she would have expected during her Boston life, but luxurious compared to her recent experiences on the trail. Unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, she stood at the window, gazing at the darkened street below. Somewhere beyond the town lights, James was being held against his will, the husband she had traveled across the country to marry, the man she had barely begun to know before circumstances tore them apart. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Sarah Montgomery, the newspaper editor's wife who had first told her about the Spanish land grants. I heard you'd returned, Sarah said. May I come in? Over tea brought. Up by the hotel proprietor, Eleanor recounted her journey to Santa Fe and the current standoff with Holloway. You've accomplished what many would have thought impossible, Sarah said, admiration evident in her voice. Finding those documents, getting them to the proper authorities, securing protection for the Apache village. It's not finished yet, Eleanor reminded her. Not while James remains Holloway's prisoner, Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Robert's been gathering information about Holloway's operations, discreetly, of course. There are rumors his financial position isn't as secure as he portrays. Several Eastern investors have grown concerned about his methods and the increasing scrutiny from territorial authorities. That might explain his desperation to secure the water rights, Eleanor mused. If his investors are wavering, he needs a significant victory to maintain their confidence. Exactly, which makes tomorrow's parley both dangerous and promising. Sarah hesitated, then continued. Robert's also heard whispers about your husband's condition. He's apparently being treated fairly well. Valuable leverage isn't mistreated, but he's made several escape attempts. The last one nearly succeeded. Pride surged through Eleanor. James wasn't accepting his captivity passively. Thank you for telling me this, she said warmly. It gives me hope. After Sarah departed, Eleanor finally managed a few hours of restless sleep. She rose before dawn, dressing carefully in the clean clothing provided for her in Santa Fe. Today's parley required her to project confidence and resolve. Colonel Watson was already reviewing plans with his men when she joined them for a simple breakfast at the hotel. The colonel had changed into a formal dress uniform, the brass buttons and insignia a reminder of the official authority he represented. "Our messenger returned an hour ago," he informed her. "Holloway has agreed to the meeting at Cottonwood Creek at 10 o'clock. He'll bring 3 men and your husband." Eleanor's heart leaped. "James will be there?" Apparently, Holloway understands his primary bargaining chip needs to be visible. Watson's expression remained serious. "Mrs. Blackwood, you should prepare yourself. These situations are unpredictable. Maintain composure regardless of what occurs." By mid-morning, they were approaching the designated meeting place, a grassy clearing beside Cottonwood Creek, marked by a stand of ancient trees that provided the only shade for miles around. Watson led their small procession, himself, Eleanor, and 4 soldiers riding in formation. From the opposite direction came another group, 5 riders approaching at a measured pace. Even at a distance, Eleanor recognized Holloway's broad-shouldered figure at the lead, and beside him, hands apparently bound to his saddle horn, was James. The sight of her husband, alive but clearly under duress, sent a surge of emotions through Eleanor. His face was bruised, his clothing dirty, but his posture remained unbowed. As they drew closer, his eyes found hers, widening in surprise before his expression settled into something more complex. Concern mixed with unmistakable pride. The 2 groups halted about 20 yards apart. Watson nudged his horse forward, meeting Holloway in the space between. "Mr. Holloway," the colonel greeted formally. "Colonel." Holloway's tone was equally measured. "I see you've brought Mrs. Blackwood." A risky decision. Mrs. Blackwood insisted on being present. "She's demonstrated remarkable courage throughout this affair." Holloway's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "Indeed she has. Boston society clearly breeds formidable women." Eleanor urged her horse forward to join the conversation, keeping her expression composed, despite the desire to ride directly to James. "Mr. Holloway, this standoff benefits no one," she said directly. "The Spanish land grants have been officially registered with the Territorial Commissioner. The Apache claim is secure, and holding my husband hostage has transformed a land dispute into a criminal matter." Holloway studied her with calculated assessment. "Forthright as always, but matters aren't quite so simple." He gestured expansively. "I've invested considerably in developing this territory, created jobs, brought Eastern capital to a neglected region. The water rights in question are essential to continued progress. Progress shouldn't come at the expense of existing legal rights." Watson interjected. "Legal rights can be reinterpreted," Holloway countered, "or compensated. I'm prepared to offer substantial payment to the Apache for certain water access, a mutually beneficial arrangement. That would be for them to decide freely without coercion," Eleanor replied, "which brings us to the immediate issue, my husband's unlawful detention." James had remained silent during this exchange, but his eyes hadn't left Eleanor. Now he spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "Don't negotiate with him, Eleanor. Whatever he promises, he won't honor it." One of Holloway's men cuffed James roughly. "Quiet, Blackwood." Colonel Watson's expression hardened. "That was unnecessary, Mr. Holloway, and unwise." Holloway raised a placating hand. "Overzealous employee. My apologies." He turned back to Eleanor. "Your husband has been treated reasonably well considering his uncooperative attitude. His release is simple. Convince the Apache to accept my compensation offer for shared water rights, a fair exchange." "That's extortion," Eleanor said flatly. "That's business," Holloway corrected. "Everyone gets something they want." Colonel Watson shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Holloway, You should understand your position clearly. Reinforcements from Fort Union will arrive within days. The territorial governor has been informed of this situation. Your eastern investors are reportedly growing concerned about the methods being employed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Holloway's face before his confident mask returned. Threats, Colonel? I expected better from an army officer. Not threats, facts. Watson's tone remained even. You have limited options remaining. Release Mr. Blackwood and withdraw your men from Devil's Ridge, and the matter can potentially be resolved without criminal charges. Continue this course, and federal authorities will have no choice but to treat this as armed insurrection. Tension crackled between the two men. Eleanor watched Holloway carefully, seeing calculations running behind his eyes. After a long moment, he spoke again. I propose a compromise. Blackwood will be released today as a gesture of good faith. In return, I request 1 week to present my case directly to the Apache leadership, with military observers present to ensure fair negotiation. No pressure, no threats, simply business discussion between interested parties. Eleanor glanced at Watson, reading his cautious assessment. The proposal offered a way for Holloway to retreat without complete capitulation, maintaining his image with investors while surrendering his most provocative action. James must be released immediately, not at day's end, Eleanor stipulated, and any discussions with the Apache must be entirely voluntary on their part. Agreed, Holloway said too quickly. Watson remained wary. Your men at Devil's Ridge? Will. Withdraw to my main ranch by sunset. You have my word as a businessman. Neither Watson nor Eleanor placed much value on that particular oath, but the practical outcome mattered more than Holloway's integrity. Very well, Watson decided. Release Mr. Blackwood now, and we'll arrange for representatives of the Territorial Land Office to facilitate a meeting with the Apache leadership, should they choose to entertain your proposals. Holloway nodded to one of his men, who rode to James's side and cut the ropes binding his hands to the saddle. James immediately urged his horse forward, crossing the open space between the two groups. Eleanor's composure finally broke as she nudged her mount to meet him, their horses coming alongside each other. Eleanor, James said softly, his eyes drinking in her face. What you've done? Later, she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. We need to complete this first. Watson positioned himself protectively near them, addressing Holloway once more. We'll expect your withdrawal from Devil's Ridge to be complete by sunset, as agreed. Lieutenant Harrington's patrol will verify compliance. Of course, Colonel. Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Blackwood, a pleasure negotiating with you again. I suspect you missed your calling in Boston business circles. With the tip of his hat, he wheeled his horse around, his men following. As they rode back toward their camp, only when they were well beyond earshot did Watson visibly relax. He's up to something, the colonel muttered. That was too easy. Agreed, James said, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position in the saddle. Holloway doesn't surrender advantage without securing another. Eleanor studied her husband with concern, noting the bruises on his face and the careful way he held himself. You're injured. Nothing serious, James assured her. Mostly wounded pride at being caught so easily. The ride back to Copper Creek allowed Eleanor and James their first real conversation in weeks. As they trailed slightly behind Watson and his men, James listened with growing amazement as Eleanor recounted her journey. From the visit to the Apache village to the discovery of the Spanish documents, the perilous trip to Santa Fe, and the legal battle she'd waged on behalf of both the Apache and their ranch. I hardly know what to say, he admitted when she finished. Most women would have sought safety, not ridden into greater danger. Most women haven't watched everything they valued stripped away once before, Eleanor replied. I wasn't going to let it happen again. James studied her with new eyes. When I sent that letter to Boston, I hoped for a practical partner, someone sensible who could help manage a household. A smile touched his battered face. I never expected to get a warrior. The unexpected compliment warmed her. Not a warrior. Just someone who discovered she had more courage than she realized. Back in Copper Creek, Sheriff Miller arranged for the town doctor to examine James, while Watson dispatched riders to Lieutenant Harrington with news of the agreement and orders. To verify Holloway's withdrawal from Devil's Ridge, the doctor pronounced James badly bruised, but without serious injury. Rest, decent food, and time will set him right, he assured Eleanor. That evening, James and Eleanor finally had private time together in the hotel's small dining room, tucked away in a corner booth. Despite the public setting, it was the first opportunity they'd had for truly personal conversation since their hasty wedding. "I keep thinking about our wedding day," James said, as they finished a simple meal. "You are standing there in that blue dress, saying vows to a stranger. And now, barely a month later, you've risked everything to save not just me, but people you'd only just met." Eleanor met his gaze. "They're not strangers anymore. The Apache welcomed me when they had no reason to, and you—" She hesitated, sorting through her complex feelings. "You're not the stranger I married either." "No?" James's expression softened. "What am I now?" "Someone I'm beginning to know, to respect." Eleanor's cheeks warmed slightly, perhaps even to care for. James reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "When Holloway's men held me, I had plenty of time to think. About the ranch, about what matters." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I kept coming back to the morning you arrived on that stagecoach. How you stepped down into the dust with your head high, facing whatever came next with dignity." Eleanor smiled at the memory. So distant now it seemed to belong to a different life. "I was terrified inside. You didn't show it. Not then, not since." James's eyes held hers. "I know our marriage began as a practical arrangement, but I find myself hoping it might become something more." Before Eleanor could respond, Colonel Watson appeared at their table, his expression grave. "Pardon the interruption," he said. "We have a situation developing. Lieutenant Harrington's scouts report no movement at Devil's Ridge. Holloway's men appear to be entrenching rather than withdrawing." James straightened, wincing slightly at the sudden movement. He never intended to honor the agreement, so it seems. Watson looked grim. "There's more. We've received word that a group of Holloway's men were seen heading toward the Apache village. Less than an hour ago." Alarm shot through Eleanor. "A diversion. Keep our attention on Devil's Ridge while striking elsewhere." "Precisely my concern," Watson agreed. "I've already dispatched riders to warn Harrington, but they may not arrive in time." James was already standing. "We need to get to the village." "You're in no condition to ride," Eleanor protested. "This is my fight too," James replied firmly. "These are our neighbors, our allies." Watson nodded his approval. "We'll leave immediately. Sheriff Miller can assemble a posse of trustworthy townsmen to support us." As they hurried to prepare, Eleanor found herself gripped by both fear and resolve. Holloway had revealed his true nature, a man willing to smile and negotiate while simultaneously planning treachery. The stakes had escalated beyond water rights and land claims to the immediate safety of the Apache village. Within 30 minutes, they were riding out of Copper Creek. Colonel Watson, James, Eleanor, the 4 Army soldiers, and 8 townsmen recruited by Sheriff Miller. The night was clear, a 3/4 moon providing enough light to follow the trail without torches that might announce their approach. Eleanor rode beside James, watching him carefully for signs that his injuries were hampering him. He sat straight in the saddle despite obvious discomfort, his face set with determination. Something had shifted between them during their brief reunion, a deeper connection forging in the crucible of shared purpose. As they rode through the night toward the Apache village, Eleanor's thoughts returned to her arrival as a mail-order bride a short time ago. She had come west seeking security after losing everything in Boston. Instead, She had found purpose, courage, and perhaps something even more valuable, a true partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. Whatever awaited them at the Apache village, Eleanor knew with sudden clarity that she had found her place in this harsh, beautiful territory. And she would defend it and its people with everything she had. The Apache village came into view just as dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the landscape in soft rose and gold. Eleanor felt a surge of relief when she saw no immediate signs of attack, no flames, no commotion. Perhaps they had arrived in time. Hanska emerged from his wickiup as they approached, alerted by sentries posted at the village perimeter. The old chief looked unsurprised by their arrival, his weathered face revealing nothing as Colonel Watson quickly explained the situation. Holloway's men were seen heading this way, Watson concluded. We believe he means to strike while attention is focused elsewhere, Hanska nodded calmly. We know. Nashota returned yesterday with news of your success in Santa Fe. He also warned that Holloway speaks with two tongues. You've prepared defenses? James asked, dismounting carefully. Our warriors are positioned, Hanska confirmed. Women and children have been moved to caves in the hills. His gaze shifted to Eleanor. You have fulfilled your promise, bringing our land papers to the white authorities. This fight need not be yours. Eleanor dismounted, meeting the old man's eyes directly. It became my fight when I decided this territory was my home. Your people are part of that home. Hanska studied her for a long moment, then nodded with evident respect. Then we welcome your help. Colonel Watson quickly organized their defensive strategy, integrating his soldiers and the town volunteers with the Apache warriors. James, despite his injuries, insisted on taking position with a group guarding the eastern approach. Eleanor remained near the center of the village, with Nahimana and several other women who had refused evacuation, preparing bandages and water for the defenders. Your husband fights despite his wounds, Nahimana observed as they worked. He has a strong spirit. Yes, Eleanor agreed, glancing toward where James had taken position. Stronger than I knew when I agreed to marry him. Nahimana smiled knowingly. Sometimes the heart sees what is invisible to the eye. The attack came shortly after sunrise, a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Holloway had assembled more men than intelligence suggested, perhaps 30 riders splitting into smaller groups to approach from different angles. The sound of gunfire erupted along the perimeter, followed by shouts and the pounding of hooves. Eleanor's hands trembled as she continued preparing medical supplies, but she kept working. Through gaps between dwellings, she caught glimpses of the conflict, Apache warriors and their allies taking cover, returning fire with precision, forcing Holloway's men to retreat and regroup repeatedly. Colonel Watson moved between defensive positions, directing his soldiers with calm authority, while Sheriff Miller and his volunteers held the southern approach. The battle settled into a tense stalemate. Holloway's men unable to breach the village defenses, but the defenders unable to drive them off completely. As midday approached, a new sound drew Eleanor's attention. More riders approaching from the west. Her heart sank, thinking Holloway had received reinforcements, but Nahimana, peering through a narrow opening, gave a cry of relief. Army soldiers! Many! Lieutenant Harrington's patrol had arrived, accompanied by the reinforcements from Fort Union that Watson had summoned. Their appearance instantly changed the dynamic of the battle. Holloway's men, suddenly finding themselves caught between defenders and fresh military forces, began a disorganized retreat. Within minutes, the gunfire had diminished to occasional shots as the attackers fled in multiple directions. Eleanor emerged from the shelter to find James limping toward her, rifle in hand. It's over, he said, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, but his eyes alive with relief. Harrington's men are pursuing Holloway. Eleanor embraced him carefully, mindful of his injuries. Anyone hurt? Two of the Apache warriors were wounded, but not seriously, and Miller took a bullet to the arm. James looked around at the village, intact, unburned, secure. They didn't get close enough to do real damage. Colonel Watson approached, holstering his pistol. Lieutenant Harrington reports they captured several of Holloway's men in the retreat. They've revealed that Holloway himself is leading a group toward the territorial border, hoping to escape jurisdiction. Will they catch him? Eleanor asked. Harrington's best trackers are in pursuit, Watson confirmed. I'd be surprised if Holloway reaches the border before they overtake him. In the days that followed, the full story emerged piece by piece. Holloway was captured 20 miles from the Colorado border, attempting to flee territorial justice. His financial empire, already shakier than most realized, collapsed completely when Eastern investors withdrew support after learning of his illegal tactics. The Spanish land grants were fully authenticated by the Territorial Land Office, securing both the Apache village's claim and the Blackwood Ranch's water rights. Commissioner Daniels, seemingly impressed by Eleanor's determination, personally expedited the process. As for the Apache village, something unexpected emerged from the conflict. With Holloway's schemes exposed, other settlers in the region, many of whom had harbored suspicions about his methods, began establishing more positive relations with their indigenous neighbors. Trade increased, and a tentative respect began to grow where fear and misunderstanding had previously dominated. 1 month after the battle, Eleanor stood on the porch of the Blackwood Ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in brilliant orange and purple. James joined her, his injuries healed enough that he moved with only a slight stiffness. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, standing close beside her. Eleanor smiled. "I was thinking about that stagecoach that brought me here. How terrified I was stepping down into this strange new world." "Regrets?" James asked softly. She turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Not one." James took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "The ranch is showing a profit this season, better than expected. I was thinking we might add a proper library wing to the house for all those books you mentioned in your letters." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied, touched by his remembrance of a detail from their correspondence. "And perhaps—" James hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Perhaps there might be room for a nursery someday, if you were amenable." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at the tentative hope in his voice. "I think that would be perfect." As twilight deepened around them, James drew her gently into his arms. Their kiss held promise, not the desperate passion of romantic novels, but something deeper and more enduring. A partnership forged through shared struggle, mutual respect, and growing love. Eleanor Hayes had come west as a mail-order bride, seeking only security after her family's financial ruin. Instead, she had found courage within herself, purpose, in defending those who welcomed her, and love with a man whose quiet strength matched her own fierce determination. The Western Territory had indeed transformed her, not by changing who she was, but by revealing who she had always been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.